Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you and a very warm welcome to you all. It's great to see a good number of IISS members here and friends of the Institute this evening. And I can see a large number of new faces in the audience. By way of an introduction, I am Alexander Neal, and I am a Shangri-La Dialogue Senior Fellow at IISS Asia. Our office here, in fact, is just around the corner in Raffles Place. I'm absolutely delighted that Minister Chaudhry can join us this evening to deliver the 37th IISS Fullerton Lecture in this beautiful and elegant Straits Room of the iconic Fullerton Hotel in the heart of Singapore. And I understand this is the first time in 17 years that a foreign minister has visited Singapore, so welcome. For those of you attending this lecture for the first time, the spirit and purpose of this distinguished lecture series is to promote informed and intelligent debate in Singapore and beyond on matters of international importance, but from an international perspective. The first lecture was delivered here in 2012 by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And in the intervening years, a number of presidents, prime ministers, cabinet ministers, and other internationally renowned figures have spoken at this platform. Jacek Czaputowicz has been Poland's Minister of Foreign Affairs since January 2018. He is a Doctor of Political Science and an Associate Professor of Humanities. During the communist era in Poland, he was an active member of the anti-regime opposition, for which he was imprisoned on several occasions. Then, following the collapse of Poland's totalitarian system, Dr. Czaputowicz was awarded the Officer's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta, as well as the Cross of Freedom and Solidarity. In 1990, he began work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, first as a Vice Director, and later Director of the Department of Consular Affairs and Emigrants. From 2006 to 2008, he held the position of Director of the Department of Strategy and Foreign Policy Planning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And from 2008 to 2012, he was Director of the National School of Public Administration. From January to September 2017, he headed the Diplomatic Academy of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. He was Under-Secretary of State for Legal and Treaty Issues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as of September 2017 until he was appointed as Minister. Now, the theme of the Minister's speech tonight, and in particular questions surrounding the future of a rules-based international system, really lie at the core of the debate over strategic rivalry here in the Asia-Pacific. And I very much look forward to hearing the Minister's speech and to a very engaging discussion afterwards. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for a very kind introduction. I'd like to thank the International Institute for Strategic Studies for the invitation to have a discussion with you during my visit to Singapore. I hope that this visit will be an important event in making the 50th anniversary of our bilateral diplomatic relations and paving the way for enhanced bilateral political, economic, also scientific cooperation, as well as for further investment, Singaporean investments in Poland. Today, I will present Poland's perspective on the European integration process, as well as on Asia and international system. How should this system be governed from Polish perspective? I will address also some security challenges that could influence sustainable and peaceful development of our two regions in the years to come. Let me first refer to an important anniversary that my country will celebrate next week. May the 1st will mark 15 years since Poland and other states of Central and Eastern Europe joined the European Union. Poland's EU accession crowned the efforts that were formed after Solidarity's victory in 1998. Thank you for mentioning also this year's for me and for Solidarity. At that time, it was our aim to come back to the European, so to say, part of the world, to democratic system, to freedom. And we managed to do it in 1989 with the victory of Solidarity, which started the change within the whole region, and the collapse of the Berlin Wall ended that process. Current year is also significant for the EU as a whole. In May, the European Parliament election will open a new international cycle. This all invites reflection on the EU future and the priorities it should pursue. Poland, as well as other countries of the Central and Eastern Europe, will take an active part in the discussion on the EU future. Obviously, our region is and has always been a part of European culture and civilization. Still, we ought to bear in mind that this part of Europe has its specific geopolitical location, as well as a distinct historical experience, including decades spent under the domination of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This naturally determines our political and economic position and interests. Our EU membership facilitated the modernization of our state, economy, and foreign policy. Our citizens and companies benefit from the open borders and common market. In 2004, the year we joined the EU, the GDP per capita was 47% of the EU average. Today, it reaches as much as 70%. The aim of our government is to catch up with the most developed EU countries. In the discussion on the future of the EU, we advocate a strong union that fosters economic growth and prosperity of its societies, and which helps to ensure equal living standards for the citizens of all member states. We believe that the key to the EU success is bringing it closer to the citizens. They must feel a sense of control of the direction in which the Union is heading. We need to work to rebuild citizens' trust in the EU institutions. Brexit is a good example. From our perspective, citizens of the United Kingdom had the right to criticize the European Union. They decided to leave. We will see what will happen in future. The political process is very interesting, and everybody is looking at what's going on in the UK, but the decision was taken because the European Union did not function properly, and we share that criticisms. Maybe if we reform the European Union, it will be no reason to leave it. but it is, of course, to be discussed. Fortunately, the European Union took a proper decision to give few months more to the UK to decide, to consult within the political process in the UK and maybe to reconsider or at least maybe to agree on the conditions which were negotiated. The worst scenario for Poland and for the European Union would be no-deal Brexit. But we are also seeking to enhance the competitiveness of the EU economy through the strengthening of the single market, and we oppose protectionism, which we can observe in policies of some countries. The pillars of the single market are the four freedoms: the free movement of goods, capital, services, and labor. The single market should remain an integral, indivisible, and inclusive area where all member states are treated equally. We should go even further and use the potential of the digital part of the single market. Ladies and gentlemen, today's world is much less stable and predictable than in the past decades. We are witnessing a steady erosion of a world order based on the conviction that democracy is the best form of governance, that human rights are universal and inherent, and that international law should underpin international relations. The use of military force has again become a tool for changing state borders. We see this in the neighborhood of the European continent. Russia continues to pursue its aggressive policy against Ukraine, as recently evidenced by the conflict in the Kerch Strait. This has been accompanied by attempted destabilization of the Balkans and maintaining of frozen conflicts in the Caucasus and Transnistria, and intensive disinformation and propaganda campaigns. Poland supports Ukraine's territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We advocate an effective Eastern policy implemented by the European Union. From the Polish perspective, NATO remains the pillar of Euro-Atlantic security, especially in the face of Russia's actions. We want the alliance to be strong and able to meet all security threats. We are for full implementation of NATO summit's decision, especially those taken in Warsaw in 2016 and in Brussels in 2018, regarding adaptation of NATO's deterrence and defense posture, reforming the NATO's command structure, and increasing the pool of high readiness forces. Warsaw Summit decisions on the enhanced forward presence are already implemented. It strengthens our security. On the other hand, Poland hosts one of 4 NATO battle groups. Other countries in the region are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Polish troops and assets are present in the NATO enhanced forward presence in Latvia and in the tailored forward presence in Romania. The alliance has to work on our infrastructure and on the ability to move our forces across the theater. Moreover, NATO, as much as the European Union, investigate new ways to address hybrid and cyber threats. We are convinced and we are concerned by the erosion of the INF Treaty and other arms control agreements as they undermine our security. Russian middle-range missile system is in violation of the INF Treaty and should be seen as in a wider context of missile threat posed by that country. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland tries to contribute to the enhancement of the security and peace building in other parts of the globe through its membership in the Security Council for the term 2018-2019. Our priority are strengthening of international law, promoting protection of civilians in armed conflict, and advocating for peaceful settlement of disputes. We organized or co-organized a number of briefings and debates on the situation of civilian population during armed conflicts, on the impact of climate change on international peace and security, and developments in Ukraine and in Syria. We chaired the Preparatory Committee for the 2020 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference and led the work of the Hague Code of Conduct against ballistic missile proliferation. In our opinion, the effectiveness of both regimes should be enhanced by increasing transparency and strengthening dialogue between states that have nuclear weapons and their allies. We are concerned with the security situation on the Korean Peninsula and danger created by nuclear and missile programs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In our opinion, the summit between the US and the DPRK in Singapore on 12th June last year created atmosphere and circumstances for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Poland is one of 7 EU member states that maintain a permanent diplomatic mission in Pyongyang. We are also an active member of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission in Korea. We are part of the military operation of the Global Coalition Against ISIS and of NATO's training mission in Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, and Qatar. In Afghanistan, the Polish armed forces are helping to build local security structures. Altogether, roughly over 1,500 Polish soldiers are currently stationed abroad, trying to contribute to peace and security in the world. It is also an example of our solidarity with allies. If we expect and when we expect solidarity from the United States, other NATO members to defend Polish territory in case of aggression or threat posed by Russia currently, we also have to demonstrate our solidarity with them and be active in the regions of concern to these allies. So this is a basis of our foreign policy. Poland's latest initiative was the organization, together with the United States, the Ministerial to Promote Peace and Security in the Middle East in February this year in Warsaw. Thanks to this initiative, the high-level officials of the Arab world and Israel met for the first time in many years. The outcome of the meeting was the launch of the so-called Warsaw process that is based on dialogue of experts within working groups devoted to such topics like countering terrorism, ballistic missile proliferation, maritime aviation security, energy security, cyber security, humanitarian issues, refugee-related topics, and human rights. The results of the activity of these working groups will be presented in the beginning of next year at the similar conference as the one which took place in Warsaw. Sometimes we are asked, is it worth to embark on such an important issue with no many chances to reach an agreement on the Middle East peace process? Our answer is yes, we have to try. So being a member of the Security Council, we also take part in this initiative. in order to contribute to peace and stabilization in the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, the significance of Asia-Pacific is constantly growing for many actors, for the United States, for Europe, and also for Poland. Our policy and the increasing diplomatic presence in the region serve one of the main objectives of our foreign policy, which is supporting our economic development, gaining access to new markets, and attracting high-quality investments. Asia, with its huge demographic potential and spectacular economic and technological development, is quickly becoming the economic center of the world. This is reflected in our trade exchange with Asia that is constantly increasing. Its volume has risen 11% last year compared to the previous year. We are constantly expanding the network of foreign trade offices of the Polish Investment and Trade Agency. Until now, they have been opened in 13 cities across Asia: Sydney, Shanghai, Chengdu, Mumbai, Jakarta, Tokyo, Seoul, Kuala Lumpur, Ulaanbaatar, Singapore, Bangkok, Taipei, Ho Chi Minh City, the last one. So quite dense network of trade offices with the aim to work for maintaining and improving our economic relations with these countries I just mentioned. But security is an important context of international cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. And we are perfectly aware of this. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, in a recent review of the security situation in the region, pointed out as many as 5 Asian countries involved in armed conflicts of different nature. This is a risk factor we need to take into consideration in our policy towards the region. Undoubtedly, the situation on the Korean Peninsula remains one of the main sources of threats to security and stability in East Asia, although we also note the positive change that have occurred in this part of the world recently. The political and economic processes taking place in Asia Pacific have an increasing impact on the EU and Poland. It is important for us to strengthen our links with Asia, especially in the field of economy. We want to do this on 3 levels in our foreign policy. Firstly, through strategic partnership and political dialogue. Secondly, through active participation in multilateral fora, including formulating EU's policy towards Asia-Pacific. And thirdly, through the development of comprehensive economic cooperation, including the areas of energy and technology. So far, we have established 3 strategic partnerships in the region with the Republic of Korea, with Japan, and with the People's Republic of China. This helped us to significantly strengthen our relations with these countries, with further potential for cooperation in such areas as energy, research, defense cooperation, and cybersecurity. These countries are also important partners in terms of investment. The volume of trade with our major partners in Asia is also growing, but we would like this exchange to have a more balanced character. For several years now, we have been developing comprehensive strategic partnership with the People's Republic of China, a country with which we have a 70-year-long tradition of contacts and cooperation. We are very happy to witness a rapid growth of tourist traffic between Poland and China, as well as growing number of Chinese students studying in our universities. Just as Singapore sits at a key junction of global and regional maritime connections, Poland is an active proponent of land-based connectivity projects on the Euro-Asian continent. About 80% of rail freight traffic from China to the European Union passes through Poland. We hope that China's economic opening will bring greater access for our goods to the Chinese market. And it is indeed a challenge. We face systemic imbalance with trade with the Chinese partners, and we would like to change that. Not very easy. Also, our cooperation with India is conducted on many levels, including trade and investment. We are the largest recipient of Indian investment in Central and Eastern Europe, and one of the largest in the European Union. ArcelorMittal alone has invested more than $1 billion in my country, becoming the largest steel producer in Poland. We recognize and admire the fact that the ASEAN countries are amongst the fastest developing economies in the world. We are aware that the total GDP of ASEAN member states has doubled in the last decade, and that the association, when treated as a single entity, is the 5th largest economy in the world. We notice the growing political importance of this organization and its member states. Today I am here in Singapore. Last November I visited Indonesia. This year our partner country in the Security Council. It shows that we also cooperate on political level, trying to resolve pending issues of international security. In January, I participated in the EU-ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Brussels. We are developing our presence in the region. After a break of 25 years, we are reopening our embassy in Manila. As a non-permanent member of the Security Council and a member of the Neutral Countries Supervisory Commission in Korea since 1953, Poland actively participates in the stabilization process on the Korean Peninsula, engaging in efforts aimed at the de-escalation of tensions. Poland is also involved in formulating EU's policy towards Asia, and not only by participating in the Asia-Europe meetings and in the European Union-ASEAN dialogue. We are an advocate of close links between Europe and Asia. We see the potential in this cooperation, and we are deeply convinced that it serves best interests of our countries and will benefit both Europe and Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, turning to our bilateral relations with Singapore, the importance of your country has been growing for Poland's foreign policy and economy. Last year, the main commodity exported from Poland to Singapore was electric buses. In the previous years, one of the dominant categories were luxury yachts. This shows the future trend for our exchange in goods. Our trade in services has risen more than twofold over the past few years. We are also an attractive destination for Singaporean investments in seaport and, more widely, transport and urban infrastructure. The recently announced PSA international investment in the deepwater container terminal in Gdańsk opens a new chapter in our bilateral and region-to-region relationship with potential to further increase the volume of trade in goods and services. Poland seems to be the perfect gateway for Singapore investors to expand on the European market. Scientific cooperation is one of the future engines of our partnership. Other areas of possible cooperation are artificial intelligence, electromobility, or LNG-related technology. Cooperation on digital innovations in fintech sector and high-tech solutions will connect Polish and Singaporean businesses even stronger in the years to come. I believe that the direct flight between Warsaw and Singapore, opened in May last year, will stimulate further economic cooperation and people-to-people exchanges. Ladies and gentlemen, 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of our bilateral diplomatic relation. I am glad that they have been friendly throughout that time. At this point, let me refer to the late great Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who served as Prime Minister of Singapore during 3 decades of this half-century. He said about friendship and international relations, I quote, "Friendship international relations is not a function of goodwill or personal affection. We must make ourselves relevant so that other countries have an interest in our continued survival and prosperity." I believe that both Poland and Singapore have mutual faith and an interest in each other's prosperity, which gives us a wide space for further successful cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, please. Well, Minister, that was an extremely lucid and I think it's fair to say direct expose of not only the challenges facing Poland, both in terms of strategic, traditional and non-traditional security, but also a demonstration of really how much potential, latent potential there is in Poland. And you mentioned the development goals within the EU, and I think that's very impressive. And clearly the talent pool in Poland is extremely extensive. You mentioned luxury yachts and electric buses, but also hearing about AI and cybersecurity. I mean, these are all extremely pertinent pools of expertise to help promote Poland as a new global middle power, if I might call it that. But as you made the comparison with Lee Kuan Yew's comment about making friendships, well, I think Poland really is clearly making itself relevant. So I applaud you on an excellent speech, and I think we've all learned a lot. I'm going to take the questions, some questions from the floor, but with Chairman's prerogative, if I could ask a question first of you. You mentioned the significance of the 1st of May, just around the corner, and the 15th anniversary of Poland's accession to the EU as a crowning achievement of the 1989 Solidarity Movement's victory. So that must be something that's very close to your heart, I imagine. And later on in the month, EU parliamentary elections will follow, and as you've said, that will herald a new institutional cycle for the EU and for Poland. So there's a huge amount of challenges, but also potential there. But at the same time, you warn that the world is more unstable and unpredictable than in past decades, and you describe the erosion of the world order, which is based, as you've said in your speech, on the conviction that democracy is the best form of governance, that human rights are universal and inherent, and that international law should underpin international relations, which is linked to the theme of the lecture today. So what I'd like to ask is, what, therefore, is the role of middle powers in safeguarding this so-called rules-based international system? And how does Poland, in its current capacity as a non-permanent UNSC, UN Security Council member, how can this support international law and the multilateral world order? Can you share some thoughts on that?
I try to refer to your comment and answer your questions. So definitely, from the perspective of Poland, which is, you said, middle-sized state, I would say, we are the fifth biggest in terms of population country within the European Union, but we have to be united within that organization in order to play some important role or any role in the world. So there is a saying that within the European Union there are two kind of countries, two groups: the small ones and the ones who don't know yet that they are small. So this is how you interpret the system. So we have to be honest. So the biggest one, it's maybe 80 million populations, which is not much in comparison to your neighborhood. But generally, in our interest is to defend world order based on international law. Therefore, one of our priority within the Security Council was just to strengthen the role of international law. It's threatened in our region by aggressive policy of this superpower, you can say, middle-sized, particularly Russia. We have no other option than defend rules enshrined in the Charter, UN Charter. And because if we accept that power is the main source of influence and the decisive factor, then we will be in trouble. So we have to criticize, we have to defend. Therefore, our position is to defend Ukraine, which was invaded by Russia under aggression, Crimea, and what's going on in eastern Ukraine. So we have to encourage such powers like Russia, revisionist state, from using military might. So this is the problem. Of course, there is a group of countries interested in that. Therefore, there is a support for this activity, but we cannot say that we are definitely successful. We cannot force Russia to withdraw from Crimea, for example, but this is the way how we act. Of course, I am aware of the discussion on the American foreign policy, which is sometimes criticized also within the European Union as going towards unilateralism, particularly as far as trade is concerned. So our position is to maintain this multilateral world order concerning trade, but at the same time, we try to understand American arguments and we advocate close relations between the United States and European Union. Its presence, also military presence within NATO on our territory, on European territory, is crucial for the security of Poland and of the European Union. To what extent it is possible to maintain unity of free democratic states, the West, how it was called, it's a question mark. Definitely for us, it's much closer to the United States than to other superpowers like Russia or China. Much closer. We share common values. We should be united. We try to convince others within the European Union to maintain these contacts, even if there are differences, and there are many differences concerning policy vis-à-vis Iran or Middle East, there are the differences. and we sometimes disagree, but our links are closer, and Singapore belongs to these countries of the free world. Whereas some countries also within the European Union try to equalize relations with the United States, with the relations with these competitors or strategic competitors, how it is called by the European Union, which is China and also Russia. So yes, we have to maintain international order and we have to be united.
So while Poland is really extending its reach and recognizes the strategic significance of the Asia Pacific and the economic potential, I mean, you do have some very considerable security challenges much closer to home. To return to the question of a rules-based system, and clearly this is part of your DNA in a sense, from the solidarity movement and so on. In terms of China, for example, the debate in this region is really focused on adherence to a rules-based international system. Now, China argues that it does adhere to a rules-based international system. Indeed, it has flourished as a result of that, joining the WTO and so on not so long ago. But it seems that the strategic debate here in the Asia Pacific is, really at a very basic level, it's about challenges to the existing order. And China has a new vision for that. Now, Poland's signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, and clearly China, with your strategic agreement, is a major possibility for exports for Poland, and also as the Belt and Road extends itself into Central Europe, Poland as a hub, as you said, for connectivity, that's a huge opportunity. So, to cut a long story short, how do you reconcile these questions about China's adherence to a rules-based system and the sort of opportunities, the strategic opportunities that are presented by China for Poland?
Yeah, so of course I understand and know the arguments China uses. Indeed, they are in the multilateral system, WTO. They use that system to their advantage. Now there's a growing awareness of using system created by the United States and the West by some, I would say, maybe not democratic states or autocratic states to their advantage. And there is a growing awareness. For example, the European Union recently named China as not only strategic partner, but as a strategic competitor. So a very well organized country can use freedom of expression also, internet, freedom of trade, to their advantage. We face difficulties to be active on the Chinese market, for example. There are many barriers, and there was no reaction, no strong reaction on the side of the Western countries, the United States, the European Union. So, but at the same time, we allow interference or very active investments and policy of information in Western societies for China, but also Russia. Now, as I said, I think that particularly the United States define China as a strategic competitor. I see some decisions taken by President Trump to face that challenge, to understand the role of China also with the possibility to create a threat to security of information, for example, through using technology in specific way. If there is no control, if there is no civic control over the authority, therefore it's very difficult to compete with that partner. I think that we are in a temporary period. Some maybe within a few years we'll see what will be the attitude towards this challenge China creates. Will it be united, the West, or it will be still kind of a, because already Chinese presence in some countries, in some strategic sectors in the European Union is very serious, in ports, in the telecommunication sector. Okay, but it is very important question concerning also theories of international relations. It relates to the fact which system is more efficient. We used to think that democracy was the best system, that it creates competition and inventions there in the European Union or in the United States. Now, there are many authors which claim that unification of society, authoritarian system is more efficient in the world. So we will see what will happen, but it's very interesting, this discussion, because also in technology, China develops very quickly. Also, Russia in military field developed so quickly within the last few years, creating a real challenge for the West. Is it a waking up call or not? We'll see what will happen. But I agree with those authors who say that there's something very important happening in international relations. It might be a shift of powers, and it will be kind of a defense of the position of the side of the West, maybe. Is it too late or not? I do not have the questions, but I know what to do as far as Polish foreign policy is concerned, so maintain international order based on a rule of law.
Thank you, Minister. Well, we have about 15 or 20 minutes to take some questions from the floor. When I take your question, could you identify yourself and your affiliation? And can I stress that it's a question rather than an observation? So I'll take first question from the gentleman in the second row here, please.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Iftikhar Chaudhry. I'm a fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore. I'm also former foreign minister of Bangladesh. I want to congratulate you, Minister, for your excellent expose, and not just that, because also for the stewardship of the foreign policy system of Poland at this point in time, particularly your membership of the Security Council, which we follow with very great interest. You're linking climate change with peace and security. This is something that we had done a decade ago, and we worked with Margaret Beckett to take it to the Security Council against the grain of sentiments that the role of the Security Council ought not to burgeon into areas which is not really its. Anyway, the question I want to ask is on something which has to do with rules-based international system, but not quite in peace and security. It has to do with the WTO. You mentioned this en passant, your interest in trade, but it seems to us the received wisdom is today, given the predilections of powers that be, WTO is under some threat, and that in turn threatens the rules-based international system. Everyone knows that WTO, some changes would have to be made. What kind of changes would Poland advocate in the WTO, given your background in the solidarity, etc.? I mean, obviously you have some personal and also, I know, intellectual interest in this area. Thank you.
Maybe more?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, very important question. I think, yes, indeed, we are now spent a lot of energy and time on the working of our ministry to follow on what's going on in the world and in the Security Council. So there is very interesting discussions concerning the role of non-permanent member states. There are 5 permanent members and they dominate the Security Council if there is no agreement among them, and usually it is the case, then there is no decision. So we consulted with our partners from last year from Sweden and the Netherlands. Currently, there is Germany and Belgium, how to increase role of these 10 non-permanent member states in decision making. So there is a discussion on reforming the security system, particularly in that respect. It's very difficult to change the system which is institutionalized in the charter. For example, to change the number of members or even the permanent members would be very difficult. There is a discussion within the European Union maybe to change the place of one country, which is France, to the place of the European Union, to have a participation, a voice. Of course, for France it's difficult to accept such an idea, but it shows how deep the discussions on the reforming of the Security Councils are also conducted within the European Union. As far as World Trade Organization, of course we are aware of what's going on. I don't know if it is a problem, but of course China used that system to its advantage, and China had the right to do it. And the American president realized that they have to change that system because they cannot continue with that rules. Other actors make profits of that. If there is a reform, maybe because you have two kinds of countries, the ones who are open and for an investment, for trade, and the ones who are closed, like China, closed market, very limited, not on economic basis, but if there is some access made on political basis or criteria. So if reform that system, so these countries should be also opened for trade, for investment. For example, we face very difficulties to export something to China, our products. But generally, we share the European Union's position that we should maintain free trade based on WTO. That is something which contributed to the development. Maybe, and as being with the European Union, we also try to understand the arguments made by the Americans these days. So, yeah, protectionism is a threat to free trade. We face that threat also within the European Union because there are some countries who defend free trade at international scene concerning WTO, whereas within the European Union they want to limit competition. And this is something which creates problem for us. I mean, because they want to limit activity of our companies. So it shows that every country will defend its economic interest, and we see what will be the result of that, but it's natural. Sometimes used, yes, it's kind of a rhetoric. Countries want to present themselves as a liberal, open, in positive, so to say, sense, criticizing others. But it's normal in international relations.
Should we take another question from the floor? Yes, the lady in the center row.
Thank you, sir. My name is Daisy Shuzachen, a student from NUS High. Okay, so I have 2 questions. Is that all right?
If you can make them short.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so first question is, what Poland isn't. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, how does Poland want the EU, in what direction does Poland want the EU's free market to either strengthen or reform? And the second question is, what is Poland's opinion on further integration in the European Union in matters, in non-economic matters, such as political integration, more military integration, or perhaps the Interpol, which is the border police for the entire EU? What is Poland's stance on those issues? Thank you.
And perhaps we can take a third question from the floor, if anyone would like to pose one. Aaron Connolly. Oh, sorry, is it? No, it's all right. You've had two. That's what, Aaron, come on.
Thanks, Alex. Minister, thanks for coming here. I'm mindful of the fact that you are probably the first former political prisoner to address this forum. And I wanted to ask you about an issue that has seized the attention of the Security Council and on which Poland has been outspoken in the last several discussions, and that's Myanmar. We know that last week there were about 9,000 prisoners who were released from Myanmar's jails as part of a New Year amnesty, but there were no political prisoners released. And your ambassador at the Security Council has also been very critical of Myanmar for what she termed bad faith in terms of entering into agreements with UN agencies and then not actually choosing to carry out its obligations under those agreements. What path forward do you see on this issue, on the Rohingya crisis? Does the Security Council have a role to play at this point, or have we exhausted the ability of the Security Council to play a constructive role? And as a former political prisoner, what advice would you have for your counterparts in Myanmar? Myanmar's foreign minister is Aung San Suu Kyi, herself a former political prisoner, in terms of a path forward for democracy in Myanmar. Thank you.
So Poland and the free market, integration in the EU and Myanmar, UN Security Council.
Mm-hmm. So Poland develops rapidly, economically 5% growth every year, so we catch up with the average of the European Union, so we are for free trade. We think that this free market basis and also single market, we call it, four freedoms should be maintained, and economic competition, it's an engine for development. We see threat to this basic principles in the European Union through introducing some protectionist measure. An example could be Posted Workers Directive, introduced by the European Union to eliminate workers from Central European countries who are willing to go to Western Europe to work. And the aim indeed is to defend some national markets of West European countries. Another example should be the limit for lorry drivers, to limit competition. So we think that it is a very serious threat to the basis of the European Union, which will result in stagnation. In order to grow, you have to have competition. And this is what we defend within the European Union. I must say that we share that vision with the UK. So we are on the, so to say, in the economic field, we are liberals, so to say. There is, the free trade is it's critical issue because it's directly connected to, to development and therefore to the role of the country or of the European Union as a whole in the world, positive role. So when we say we are for strong Europe, we have to protect also this economic basis of competition. And the discussion is going on. Some societies are tired and they simply want to protect their privileges, so it's, within the European Union. Another problem within the European Union, and I'm going to moving to your second question, is the legitimacy of the European institutions. We call it democratic deficit. It means that the institutions have no legitimacy to decide about politics and how to increase the legitimacy. You can resolve that issue either through more integration on the federalist basis, but there is no acceptance by civic society or citizens of the European Union. The Euro-skeptical forces have been growing in importance. Or you can try to do it through engaging democratic institutions like national parliaments, and to base that process, to legitimize the process of integration on member states. All member states are democratic within the European Union, and parliaments represent demos, the will of the society. And there is a discussion to what extent it is possible. There's a discussion maybe to some countries want to have an idea maybe to create a mechanism to force the others or to decide by majority about foreign policy, which is not acceptable by other countries. But the vision would be of the European Union, the democratic one, integrated, yes. Decisions should be taken by consensus in many foreign policy issues, and they have been taken like that, and we are successful in that. For example, our sanctions against Russia are accepted by the European Union. It is through consensus. Other issues are more controversial. For example, migration and obligatory redistribution of migrants or refugees. It is not accepted by some countries. They consider that it is sovereign state who has the right to decide to accept migrants or not. So discussion is going on, but generally I think that the European Union should be strengthened, and we have a vision, as I explained, democratic and strong and based on economic competition. As far as human rights are concerned, so the Security Council, it is institutions dealing with conflicts. Human rights also are discussed sometimes. Myanmar you mentioned, so of course any situation when there are political prisoners are unacceptable. It's one of our priorities within the Security Council to defend oppressed societies, to prevent gross violation of human rights. We are very active in commemorating genocide, for example, against Tutsi and Hutu in Rwanda. We are for defending freedom of religion, a very important issue for Poland, which is threatened particularly in the Middle East, Yazidi communities, Christians communities, and indeed some Muslim communities. And Myanmar is a concern. I know the name from the time I was in opposition, of course, very well, so I observed the situation. We have to simply, we may not forget about political prisoners, so we should not tolerate in a long-run situation when there are political prisoners, the people who have some ideas, they want to change the system, they fight with corruption, they fight with injustice. Solidarity shows that the victory is possible. Nobody expected in the 80s such a result. We will celebrate this year 30th anniversary of that victory. In June, first democratic election in Central Europe took part in Poland. And then the same year, this year, 30th anniversary of fall of Berlin Wall. So it led to the collapse of communism in that region. Yes, so reflections from that perspective, the situation has changed. Soviet Union was dissolved, Warsaw Pact was dissolved. Now we are in the West. We joined NATO, we joined European Union. But again, Russia is still aggressive, became again aggressive authoritarian system. You mentioned Myanmar, very important issue, particularly with the UK. We exchange opinion about that. They are very much interested in the situation here. They feel simply as a member of the Security Council obliged to help to resolve that issue, very difficult one. But for us also in Poland, we see, for example, that there are about 100 political prisoners, Ukrainians, kept by the Russians. Among them, 24 seamen arrested and kept in Moscow just a few months ago.
Which You're referring to the Kerch?
Kerch Strait.
Yeah.
So, yes, so this is, we have an award which we give to Foreign Minister of Poland, gives to political prisoners, pro dignitate humana. So 2 years ago there were Yazidi activists granted with that award, and this year it was a Ukrainian prisoner. So we have to, we may not forget about that, and we have to mobilize international community in order to defend them. Sometimes very difficult if there is authoritarian system.
Well, if there aren't any further questions from the floor, I've spotted one. Jack Broom.
Is it working? Yes, Jack Broom from IISS. The international system has traditionally been based on a liberal democratic values. But I thought it was interesting in response to Alex's question, you raised the debate about the merits of the authoritarian system as a development model. Now, the US, I think, was it today, they had a vote in the UN about the use of rape in war. So already there's examples of how the US and its values can be contradicting at least the values that the international system was originally based on. So my question to you, a rules-based international system, on whose rules should it be based?
I am not sure if I understood your introduction, but of course, question I understand. I understand that you criticize the American policy. Of course, it could be criticized, and there are many authors, also politicians, particularly also within the European Union, who criticize American president, and I try to understand the change of the policy, so you can see, you can look at international order from the perspective of national interest, and it is what President Trump is doing. For example, arguing for more spending on defense within NATO, saying that the Americans will not guarantee security of Europeans unless they will invest in their defense. And it is justified. He says that, okay, you want us to defend from Russia and you do not spend on military enough, and how is it fair or not? So there is a justification of that. So we try to understand the situation of a country which wants to improve its international standing. When you ask about what international rules, when I use that word, I simply refer to the UN Charter and the rules also World Trade Organization established after the Second World War. And then there are some very important provisions when we often refer to, for example, non-aggression, yes, sovereignty, defending sovereignty of states. So when we refer to the situation in Ukraine or in Georgia, and Russian activity, we recall that principle. So there are good principles, so we can defend them. There is a problem, of course, and there is a competition between countries how to interpret them. Law of the sea, and the sea here, North China Sea. Another example of fight between different interpretations. It was always like that, and it will be like that, but the basic principles are rooted in the Charter of the United Nations.
Well, Minister, thank you very much for those very succinct and very well-considered answers. I think we've covered quite a range, sometimes philosophical in nature, very strategic at times, but I think we've all learned a great deal about Poland's aspirations and also its potential. And on the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations with Singapore, I wish you all the best for your onward trip. But I've personally learned a huge amount, and it's been a real privilege and an honor to host you today. So if the audience can join me in thanking the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was excellent. Really good to